Hi gentlemen, in this video we are going to be looking at demand. Okay, a really important concept in Unit 1, Topic 3, demand from consumers, demand from businesses. When we want to buy something of value and we have the money to back it up, we demand a product. That's what we're going to be looking at. By the end of this video, we're going to be able to define demand, explain how it can move and shift, and also be able to sketch demand using a schedule. So let's get into it. Like always, we should start with a definition. So, demand. Our textbook definition of demand is something like this. It is the quantity of a commodity that will be purchased in a market over a given time and at a given price. That is our textbook definition of demand. So let's break that down. We're looking at the quantity of a commodity. Now, a commodity is just an economic term which refers to really anything of value. Now, you might hear commodities a lot in the news, and they're referring to things like gold, or they're referring to oil, or they're referring to platinum. These are just items of value. So if something can be purchased and it's desirable, it's a commodity. So the quantity of a commodity that will be purchased in a market over time and given a particular price. Now, it's really important that we understand the difference between what is effective demand and what's something that's just a want or it's just a need. These concepts are different. So let's look at that. If we're going to have what we call effective demand or real demand, right? That is different to a simple need or want, okay? And here's the difference between these two economic concepts. Effective demand is when we desire something. We desire something because it gives us some sort of like utility or satisfaction. Now, if we take utility and break that down, utility is that just like we have a use for something, we desire something. So the pen I'm using to write with has innate utility in the sense that it's going to enable me to write, okay? A hammer has a utility because it helps you hammer in nails, right? Hence, we desire something for its utility or use, okay? So first off, we desire that commodity. Secondly, we are willing and able to spend. We are willing and able to spend money to purchase that commodity in the marketplace. That willingness and ability to pay is the real distinction between effective demand and just a want. Like, you can go to Woolies and Coles tonight and you'll see a 6-year-old having a hissy fit in the confectionery aisle. They're screaming, or they're lying down on the floor, banging their head on the ground, screaming that they want a lolly. Now that 6-year-old does not demand a lolly, right? They don't demand chocolate. They want chocolate, but they do not demand it because the 6-year-old doesn't have the ability to pay for that item. You know, I want a Ferrari. That will be lovely, okay? Rather than driving around the rust bucket that I have. Ferrari would be great. I want it. Do I demand it? No, because I personally am not willing or able to pay for it. That's the distinction, okay? A want is just something that's desired, but we aren't willing or able to pay for it, okay? That's the difference between these two things. Now let's unpack demand even further. Let's look at what governs demand. What is going to influence, what are the forces that influence our demand to purchase different goods and services? Now, demand is dictated by what we call the law of demand. This is going to dictate the quantities in which we purchase. And the law of demand states very, very clearly that as price increases, quantity demanded decreases, and vice versa. There is an inverse relationship between quantity demanded and price. As price goes up, we can't afford to purchase as much of that good or service. So as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, and that's clearly dictated by the relative scarcity of our money. Price goes up, demand goes down. Then vice versa is also true. As the prices go down, we can purchase more. Quantity demanded goes up when prices go down. So the law of demand helps us understand how demand functions. Okay. Now, we're going to graph this in a sec. But before we do, there is another law that influences consumer demand. And that law, which we often skip over, but it's important that we understand this. That law is called the law of diminishing marginal utility. Okay. This law may not be as significant as the law of demand, but it still helps us understand how demand changes or fluctuates over time and given a certain price. So let's unpack the law of diminishing marginal utility. Now, the law of diminishing marginal utility is this theory, this economic concept that states with every additional unit of consumption, utility or satisfaction diminishes, if you will. So I'm going to just visualize I'm at an all-you-can-eat buffet. And guys, I will smash a buffet. It's ridiculous. Like, they will make a loss on me. But I'm at a buffet. And I'm sitting there and I go up with my first plate to fill it up with food up to the brim. And I sit down with my plate of food, keep hitting that, a plate of food, and I start digging into that first plate. Now, that first morsel of food that enters my mouth gives me the highest utility, the highest satisfaction. You know, and I'm thinking, I'm feeling great smashing this first plate of food. Now, it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. If I paid $40 to get in, I want to get $40 worth of utility or satisfaction out of this service. So up I go and I get the second plate. And I go sit down and I'm smashing through the second plate and it's still pretty good. Like, don't get me wrong, like I'm still feeling pretty good. Go up and get a third plate and I sit down. Now, this is the stage where I'm thinking, it's getting a bit much. You know, it's really starting to hit in that I'm feeling a bit full. Every morsel is a bit of a challenge now, but I paid $40 to get in. I'm gonna smash it. At this stage, my marginal utility is really going down. And if I get a fourth plate or fifth plate or sixth plate, it's starting to really, my marginal utility is probably negative at this stage because it's really hard to get down any additional food. I'm not enjoying it. I'm not getting any additional utility. My utility has diminished so much that it's probably in the negatives. It's making me feel physically ill. Now we can graph that. We can literally graph that. So if I just take two axes here, right? I'll make the y-axis here our utility or our satisfaction. And then, I don't know, along the x-axis here, we can have our consumption. Okay, our consumption or the quantity that we demand. Okay, let's go with that. So here's what it looks like. It's gonna have a curve like this, okay? This curve represents our diminishing marginal utility. This was that first plate of food that I spoke about, and it was good. It was great. Loved it. Okay, I probably should be at the peak, to be honest. Oops. Utility was up there. Now, that should have been at the peak, my bad. But it still remains true. With every additional unit of consumption, every additional plate of food, it's not making me feel as happy till, see this point here, we start going into the negatives. Okay, we have negative marginal utility. Now that's going to affect the quantity we demand of something. You know, how many chocolate bars am I going to buy at the supermarket? Well, I'm not going to buy 100 of them, even if they're dirt cheap, even if they're selling it at 10 cents a chocolate bar, because after you consume a few, it's really just it's gonna feel like a struggle. It's gonna feel like a struggle. It's just gonna take up space at home. So the law of diminishing marginal utility also affects quantity demanded. Okay, so let's lock that one away. What we are going to focus most of our time on, though, is this demand and law of demand. Now, we can sketch the law of demand, that as price increase, quantity demanded decreases, and vice versa. We can sketch that. We can sketch that using a schedule. Okay, so sometimes you'll be given a table, and from the table you will sketch a demand curve. Or we can just sketch one now based on the law of demand. Now, demand will look something like this. You'll have two axes. Okay. Now let's get this right from day one. On the y-axis, that is our price. Okay, and we're going to be talking in terms of dollars. Along the x-axis, that is our quantity. Because we are just sketching demand at this stage, it's quantity demanded. Okay. Now, our demand curve, okay, because in reality, when we sketch demand, in reality it actually does curve. But for our purposes, demand is just going to be a straight line. This is our demand curve. It literally illustrates the law of demand because I can literally see that as price goes up, we demand less of this commodity. So let's take this first point here. That's our original price. I'm going to call it price 1. And our original quantity demanded, which I'm going to call quantity demanded 1. And that's this point here. As price increases, so let's say price goes up to price 2. As price has increased, our quantity demanded has decreased. We've come closer to zero, okay? So our new quantity demanded has dropped. Price has increased, resulting in a drop in quantity demanded. That is literally the law of demand on a graph, okay? And the same would work vice versa. If price dropped, quantity demanded would increase. Now, this is really important, so stay with me on this one. We're going to be talking about movements in demand and supply. We're also going to be talking about shifts in demand and supply. They are not synonymous. They are not the same thing. Movement is different to shift, okay? I often see these two things are mixed up, okay? Here's what I'm talking about. When we have a change in price, okay, that triangle just means change in, okay? When we have a change in the price of whatever commodity this is, okay, this could be the demand for bread, okay, that's what this could be. If the only thing that's changing is the price, that the seller is now going to sell the product at a higher price, then a change in price will result in movement along the existing demand curve. So when the price went up from price 1 to price 2, what happened? Well, we saw movement. That's what I'm sketching now. I'm sketching movement. We saw movement in demand. Now, when the price increases for a commodity, we call that movement in demand. In this case, when price increases, that movement is called a contraction. As price increases, the movement is called a contraction in demand. And it makes sense that demand will contract because we can't afford to buy as much of that commodity. If prices were to decrease, then that movement, when prices decrease, we're going in the opposite direction. That movement, when prices drop, is called an expansion in demand. I probably should have used different colors, but anyway, when price drops, demand expands because we can now afford to buy more of this commodity, okay? But notice that we haven't actually shifted the existing demand curve because the only thing that changed in the market was the price. That's all that's changed. And when it's only the price that changes, that is movement in demand. That movement will either be a contraction or expansion based on what's happening to price, okay? Now, movement in demand, we've seen. We can also have a shift in demand. I might do that up here. So once again, we can sketch our demand curve. Okay. The axes are the same. Here we have our price. Along the bottom, we have our quantity, okay, which I'm just going to abbreviate to P and Q. Once again, we have our downward sloping demand curve, which is governed by the law of demand. Now let's start looking at shifts in demand. A shift, not movement. So what would cause this demand curve to actually physically shift? It's going to shift to the left or shift to the right. Shifts in demand are caused by changes in the marketplace other than a change in price. Okay, let's think about that. Something has changed in the marketplace other than a change in price. For example, let's say that this is the demand curve for milk. Okay, a nice, simple commodity. This is the demand for milk. Let's pretend that we've just heard in the news that milk helps fight the coronavirus, right? You drink a lot of milk, you're going to be resilient against COVID-19. There's been a change in our tastes and preferences. We are now going to preference buying milk over a lot of other products. So in that situation, where people now prefer milk for its health benefits, that is not a change in price, it's a change in the marketplace. We are going to shift the demand curve. If it's a positive shift, like we now want more milk, then in that case, we are going to shift the demand curve to the right. If it's positive for that product, we shift demand to the right. So let's have a look. The price hasn't changed, right? Let's hypothesize that the price of milk is still $2 per litre. But what's happened? We now demand more milk. This was our original quantity demanded here at this point. But our new quantity demanded is now up here because that's our new demand curve. Quantity demanded has what we're going to say that quantity demanded has increased. Okay? Quantity demanded has increased. When we shift the demand curve to the right, that is an increase in demand caused by a change in the marketplace for that product. In this scenario, when we prefer milk more now, it's resulted in an increase in demand for milk. Okay? When we talked about movement, we talked about contractions and expansions. Now we're talking about shifts. It's either going to be an increase or it could also be a decrease. Okay, if we were to shift in the opposite direction, we can have a decrease in demand. For example, let's say that there is a change in the marketplace for the number of buyers. So, again, COVID-19, there are less people out there at the shops at the moment. You know, you go to a Rebel Sport or something like that, it's probably going to be empty, right? You're not going to see as many buyers. So when the number of buyers decreases, that's going to result in a shift in demand, a negative one. Now, a negative shift in demand is that decrease in demand that we can see there. I'll label that D2. Okay, if there are fewer buyers in the marketplace, demand decreases. And now if I look at the graph, I can visually see that quantity demanded has decreased from the original quantity demanded. Okay, so one last time. A movement in demand is caused by just a change in the price of that particular commodity. If anything else were to change in the marketplace, you are looking at a shift in demand. Okay, they are different. I think to finish off with, let's just put a list together of some of the most common, events that could shift demand. What might they be? Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is, this could be a good place to start. What could those shifters be? So we've already jotted down if there's a change in tastes or preferences for a product, that could do it. That could either cause an increase or decrease. We've also looked at if there's a change in the number of buyers in the marketplace, that could result in an increase or decrease. Now, interestingly, increases and decreases in demand can be caused by competitive and complementary goods. Okay, they were part of the fundamentals. So, I'm going to use a random example. Let's start with competitive goods. Okay. Say we're analysing the demand for coffee, right? It's literally just the only thing that I've got here with me. We're just going to analyse the demand for coffee, right? Now, let's say that tea has become cheaper. If tea has become cheaper, tea is a competitive good to coffee. The buyers are going to opt to buy more tea and less coffee because tea is cheaper. So that's going to result in a decrease in demand for coffee. Demand for coffee will decrease based on what's happened to the price of the competitive good. Okay? Furthermore, complementary goods can also affect demand for a particular commodity. So, if I choose another example, I'm just going to sketch it here. Can you guys see that? Yeah. Price and quantity. Let's say this time we're looking at the demand for computers. Okay. Demand for computers. Okay. There's our demand curve. Boom. Easy. Now, what could be a complementary good for computers? Software, like Microsoft. If the price of Microsoft software skyrockets, okay, software is a complementary good, the price of software has skyrocketed, then demand for computers would decrease. If the price of software became dirt cheap, that everyone was practically giving away software for free, then demand for computers would increase. Oops, 1 and 2. That would be an increase in demand because now software is dirt cheap. Might as well get a computer. Okay. So, competitive and complementary goods can shift demand. Okay. A couple of other little things. Income levels. If income levels fall in the economy, that will result in a decrease in demand and vice versa. And the last one is future expectations. Our perception of the future will affect demand. Now, we can see it. We can see it every day. Like, take the demand for pasta or rice. You know, people got in their heads that we were going to have a national shortage of pasta and rice, which is ridiculous because we have really good food security in Australia. But it doesn't matter. The future expectation was that we are going to run out of food. Right? Is it real? No. But it's the expectation. So what did that do to demand for these products, like the demand for rice? Okay. It resulted in a significant increase in demand for rice because our future expectation was that it was going to run out. Okay. Whether that comes to pass or not, it doesn't matter. That was the perception of the future. So because we thought it was going to run out, we all rushed in and quantity demanded increased. Okay, so that's just an example. So here we've got a list of 6 possible, I guess, changes in the marketplace that can result in a shift in demand. Okay, so what are the important things that you need to know from this video? First off, can you define demand? Can you explain the law of demand? Do you understand the law of diminishing marginal utility? And can you sketch demand on a graph? Finally, do you understand the difference between movement in demand, which is an expansion or contraction? And then do you understand the difference then to a shift in demand, which is either an increase or a decrease? If you understand that, then you are traveling really, really well. Like always, the expectation is that you go to the relevant pages in the textbook, which help to unpack this using different words. That you jump on and have a look at the PowerPoint slides that again will help explain exactly this, but in a different way to make sure that this is solid. So gentlemen, that is demand in Unit 1, Topic 3 of Economics. All right, good luck.